I really like this article from the Wall Street Journal from a few years ago now, but still very relevant, at least to me. And it kind of just pushes back against the assumption that our primary or potentially even our exclusive problem with prescription drug overdoses is limited to opioids. And in fact, the data shows, and in this case, data from um, federal level poison control data gathering and data warehousing from poison control centers across the state, across the nation, shows us that actually the most common medication mistakes, meaning that there is an adverse medical event, even if it's a minor one, due to an accidental overdose or misdose of a medication. So that's what we're talking about here. So the number one is actually not opioids, but cardiovascular drugs, and specifically beta blockers and calcium channel blockers. In fact, it's a good bit more than pain medicine. The other thing that the article points out is that acetaminophen is also a very common source of accidental overdose. And one of the things I can tell you from my days in working in emergency and acute care, it's also a common drug of choice for intentional overdose. And I can tell you that sadly, I have seen instances where people, including very young people, do permanent damage to themselves, medical damage to themselves, with acetaminophen being brought into the emergency room and requiring intensive care and full recovery doesn't always happen. I've seen a person not fully recover from an intentional acetaminophen overdose. So, and it can also be fatal in overdose. So, acetaminophen is also another pain drug to pay close attention to, both from the standpoint of accidental overdoses, which is the focus of this article, as well as a source of potentially high lethal suicide means. The other source of high source of common medication mistakes and adverse events is insulin. Hormone therapies as a category, but that is primarily related to insulin, and obviously insulin is a treatment of diabetes. One of the things that I wasn't really aware of until I read this article was that generally for folks with diabetes who are taking insulin, their morning dose is often starkly different than their evening dose, and if you confuse the two, you can have you can cause yourself a serious medical problem. So, so that is so it's another important data point when we talk about pain medication and pain and medication management. So we're all pretty well versed in the amount to the extent that opioid prescriptions have increased by a great amount over the last number of decades. Um, but what we may be less aware of is that in general, people are, and this is obviously just one study, but in general, people are prescribed more pain medicines for procedures than they typically use. So most people, up to almost three-fourths of people, don't use some or all the pain medicines that they receive through the prescription and then through the pharmacy, and up to the vast majority of people hang on to those drugs, whether they mean to or not, whether they just forget about them, or for people who are baby boomers or older, people who are older baby boomers likely would remember the Great Depression, may have lived through it too, as very young children. They certainly, and to a slightly lesser extent, baby boomers have their parents were directly lived through the Great Depression, and a common generational aspect of that is a reluctance to throw things away, especially medication. That's not necessarily written. That's not in the article. That's just a personal observation. But anyway, it's not just the increase in prescriptions and people misusing and overusing, but people who get prescriptions that they just don't use for procedures of all kinds and end up having oftentimes beneath their notice um, lots of drug, prescription and other narcotic drugs in their medicine cabinet.